I have to tell you something that happened 5 years ago. Something that completely changed my perception of what's possible in this world. I'm an urban photographer, or at least I used to be. I specialize in abandoned places, factories, schools, hospitals. There's something beautiful in decay, or so I thought. It was October 2019, and a contact told me about Mercy General Hospital on the outskirts of a small town in Pennsylvania. It had closed in 1987 after multiple scandals involving unexplained deaths in the psychiatric ward. The building had been abandoned for decades, and aerial photos showed a perfect layout for my portfolio. I arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, just as the sun was beginning to set. The hospital was larger than I expected. 5 floors of red brick covered in vines, broken windows that looked like empty eyes staring out at the surrounding forest. The air smelled of dampness and something else, something vaguely medicinal that shouldn't be there after so many years. I entered through a first-floor window. My flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing hallways with peeling wallpaper, overturned rusty gurneys, and those wheelchairs you always find in these places, covered in dust but strangely well-preserved. I took a few photos of the main lobby, of the nurse's station with files strewn across the floor. The natural light was fading rapidly. I decided to go up to the 3rd floor, where, according to my research, the psychiatric ward was located. The stairs creaked beneath my feet, and each step kicked up clouds of dust that danced in the beam of my flashlight. When I reached the 3rd floor, something felt different. The air was colder, thicker. My breath condensed in front of me, even though the temperature outside was mild. The West Wing hallway stretched out before me, longer than seemed possible. The doors to the rooms were mostly open, revealing empty spaces with rusted metal beds and leather straps hanging from the frames. But there was one door at the end of the hall that was closed. I don't know why, but something drew me toward it. As I walked down that hallway, I began to hear something. At first, I thought it was the wind, but there were no drafts. It was a rhythmic sound, like labored breathing. I stopped, holding my breath, trying to locate the source. The sound stopped too. I continued toward the closed door. When I was about 10 feet away, I heard something else. Footsteps shuffling into the room. Slow, deliberate steps. My heart began to beat faster. I knew I should leave. Every instinct screamed at me. But photographic curiosity, that damn curiosity, drove me forward. I put my hand on the handle. It was freezing, so cold it almost burned me. The door opened with a creak that echoed throughout the hallway. The room was darker than the others, my flashlight barely penetrating the gloom. But I could see a bed in the center, and there was someone in it. A figure lay under gray sheets, its outline clearly visible. Its chest rose and fell with that labored breathing I'd heard. For a moment, my brain tried to rationalize. A drifter, another urban explorer. But something was off. The sheets were dust-free. They were clean, almost new. "Hello!" My voice sounded weak, broken. Breathing stopped. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. Then, slowly, the figure began to sit up. The sheets fell away, and what I saw... To this day, I can't eat dinner without the images returning. It wasn't a person. Or maybe it had once been. Its skin was a pale gray, almost translucent in the light of my flashlight. The eyes were open but completely white, without pupils. The mouth opened as if it were going to speak, but all that came out was a wet, gurgling sound. I backed away, tripping over my own feet. My flashlight fell to the floor, rolling and casting wild shadows across the walls. The thing in the bed began to move faster, its joints creaking unnaturally. It sat up, and I saw it was wearing a hospital gown that flapped like there was a wind, even though the air was completely still. I ran. God, how I ran. The footsteps behind me were impossibly quick for something that moved so unnaturally. I took the stairs 3 at a time, feeling like that thing was inches from my back. The sound of its breathing filled my ears, that wet, sick panting. I jumped out the same window I'd come in through, landing awkwardly on the wet grass. I didn't look back. I ran to my car, starting it with trembling hands. Only when I was on the main road, miles away, did I dare look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing, just the dark road behind me. But When I checked my camera a few days later, I found something I hadn't taken. Among my photos of the foyer and the stairs, there was an image of the West Wing. It was of the hallway, taken from the opposite end of the hall from where I'd been standing. And there, clearly visible in the foreground, was my back. Me, walking toward that closed door. The next photo was from inside the room. The bed was empty. The sheets were perfectly smooth. And one last photo, the exterior of the hospital, taken from the 3rd floor. My car in the parking lot. Me, carrying my gear, entering the building. I never practiced street photography again. And every night before I go to sleep, I triple-check that all the doors of my house are locked. Narrator's note. Further investigation revealed that the last patient registered in the West Wing was pronounced dead in their room in 1987. Their body was never claimed. The file is sealed, but the room number matches. 317. The same room down the hall. My name is Sarah, and I worked as a security guard during college. It wasn't the most glamorous job, but it paid well and gave me time to study during quiet shifts. In 2017, I landed a position at a peculiar property, a complex of former hospitals that had been closed and were in the process of being converted into apartments. My job was to make nightly rounds and make sure no vandals or vagrants got in. The complex consisted of 3 buildings connected by underground tunnels. Only the main building had electricity, and then only in construction areas. The rest remained dark, cold, preserved in time like a capsule from past. The night of November 12th started normally. I arrived at 10 p.m., signed in, and began my first patrol at 10:30. The protocol was simple. Walk through the 3 buildings, check doors and windows, and stamp my report with checkpoints on each floor. It usually took me 2 hours to complete the entire patrol. Building A was fine. Building B, which had been the maternity ward, always made me nervous with faded murals of babies and animals. But that night, there were no incidents. The trouble started in Building C, the former emergency and surgery wing. I went down the tunnel that connected the buildings. My footsteps echoed strangely on the concrete walls, and the fluorescent lights flickered irregularly. Halfway down the tunnel, I heard something ahead, the metallic sound of a stretcher being rolled. I stopped. The sound stopped too. Is anyone there? I shouted. My voice bounced through the tunnel, distorted. Silence. I continued, more alert now, my hand on the pepper spray on my belt. Building C was darker than usual. Some of the normally working emergency lights were off. I used my flashlight to light the way to the stairs. I had to get to the 4th floor, where my first checkpoint was. The elevator had been out of service for years, so I took the stairs. Each floor was colder than the last. By the time I reached the 4th, my breath was forming thick clouds in front of me. I pulled out my radio to report the abnormal temperature, but all I got was static. The 4th floor had been the surgical area. The operating room still had their operating tables. The circular lights dimmed like giant dead eyes staring down from the ceiling. I found my checkpoint at the nurse's station and scanned my card. Then I heard it, a voice over the roof intercom. Nurse 2 or 4. Nurse 2 or 4. Code blue emergency. My blood ran cold. The intercom system hadn't worked in years. The voice was feminine, professional. But there was something strange about it, something mechanical and distant, as if it came from far away or a long time ago. We need more blood in operating room 4. The patient is losing too much blood. The operating rooms were numbered. I saw the nameplates on the doors as I walked slowly down the corridor. Operating room 1, 2, 3. The door to operating room 4 was ajar. A pale, bluish light emanated from inside. Every part of me told me to run, but I had to check. It was my job. I walked over to the door and peered through the crack. There was someone on the operating table. A figure covered in blue surgical sheets. But what made me recoil were the shadows on the walls. Shadows of people moving around the table, working, gesturing. But there was no one in the room except that figure on the table. The shadows weren't projections of real objects. They moved independently, with purpose and urgency. We're losing the patient, the voice over the intercom said. now sounding panicky. "We need help. We need help now." The figure at the table began to convulse. The sheets flapped violently. The shadows on the walls moved more frantically. I stepped back, but my back hit something. I spun around and almost screamed. It was an empty gurney that hadn't been their seconds before, and on it, neatly folded, was a nurse's uniform covered in dark stains. The voice on the intercom changed. It no longer sounded professional. It sounded desperate, pleading, "Why didn't you help me? Why didn't you help me when I needed you?" I ran. I didn't complete my round. I didn't collect my remaining checkpoints. I went down those stairs faster than I thought possible, through the tunnel without looking back, and didn't stop until I reached the main security booth. My supervisor found me there, trembling, unable to utter coherent words. They called the police. They searched Building C. They found nothing. No lights on, no moved stretchers, no stained uniforms. But when they reviewed the tunnel security camera footage, they found something disturbing. The cameras showed me entering Building C at 11:47 p.m. The next footage of me is from 4:23 a.m., running out of the building. That means I was in there for over 4 hours. But for me, it hadn't been more than 15 minutes. I quit that same night. I never returned. And to this day, I can't listen to intercoms without feeling a chill run down my spine. Narrator's note. Hospital records reveal that in November 1979, a nurse named Margaret Chin died during an emergency in operating room 4. She collapsed from an aneurysm while assisting in surgery. The patient also died. Both died at 4:23 a.m. This happened in the summer of 2020. During the early months of the pandemic, I was unemployed, living with my parents in a small town in Ohio, desperate for some way to make money. That's when I saw an ad on Craigslist. Wanted, helper to clean abandoned medical property. $500 per day of work. No experience necessary. I should have realized something was wrong when the salary was so high. I should have realized when they specified the job was at the old Hillcrest Sanatorium, a place the town's children told horror stories about. But I desperately needed the money. The man who hired me was named Robert. He was a real estate developer who had bought the sanatorium for next to nothing, planning to demolish it and build apartments. But before the demolition, he needed someone to retrieve some documents and equipment from the basement. The problem was that none of his regular workers wanted to go down there. "It's just a local superstition," Robert assured me as he handed me an industrial flashlight and an N95 mask. "The place has been empty since 1995. There's nothing but rats and mold." The Hillcrest Sanatorium had been a hospital for chronic mental illness. 3 floors above ground, 2 floors of basement where, according to rumors, the most experimental and controversial treatments were performed. Lobotomies, electroshock therapy, prolonged isolation. Robert led me to the upper basement. The air was stale, heavy with decades of neglect. The walls were covered in black mold, and the floor creaked beneath our feet. He handed me a list of files and equipment I needed to retrieve from the sub-basement, the deepest level. "Take the stairs at the end of the hall," he instructed. "I'll be in my truck. Call me when you're done." He handed me a walkie-talkie and left, his footsteps echoing as he walked away. I was left alone in that damp, dark basement. The staircase to the sub-basement was metal, rusty, and steep. I descended carefully, counting the steps, 22 in total. The temperature dropped with each step. The basement was a maze of narrow hallways and small rooms. My flashlight revealed padded cells, chairs with metal straps, and strange machines with wires and electrodes. It was like a museum of medical horrors. I found the administrative office Robert had described to me. The door was closed but unlocked. Inside were metal filing cabinets and boxes of old equipment. I began working, filling bags with the documents and devices on the list. I'd been working for 20 minutes when I heard the first sound, a metallic thump, distant but clear, coming from somewhere deeper in the sub-basement. I stopped listening. Another thump, then another, rhythmic, deliberate. "Robert," I called into the walkie-talkie. All I got was static. The knocking continued. I decided to ignore it and finish my job quickly. But then I heard something else. The sound of chains dragging across the concrete floor. The sound was getting closer, coming from a hallway. I shone my light toward the door, but I couldn't see anything. However, the sound was unmistakable now. Heavy chains dragging, approaching my location. My heart was beating so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I closed my bag and headed for the door. I had to go through that hallway to get to the stairs. As I left the office, my flashlight illuminated the hallway. At the end, about 20 meters away, there was a figure. It was impossible to make out any details, but its silhouette was clearly human, and it was completely motionless, as if it were watching me. "Hello." My voice sounded pathetic, shaky. The figure didn't respond. It didn't move. But the chains kept rattling, now from multiple directions. I had no choice. I had to get through that hallway. I walked as quickly as possible without running, keeping my flashlight fixed on the figure. With each step I took forward, the figure seemed to move as well, always staying at the same distance. When I was halfway down the corridor, all the cell doors around me opened at the same time. The sound of metal against concrete echoed deafeningly in the confined space. Nothing came out of the cells, but the air changed. It became colder, denser, as if something invisible had filled the space. The figure at the end of the hall finally moved. He raised an arm, pointing toward one of the open cells. From inside that cell came a voice, barely a whisper, but clear as if it were right next to my ear. "Help me. Please help me. Don't leave me here." Then I saw something that nearly made me collapse. From the darkness of each open cell, hands began to emerge. Dozens of pale, emaciated hands, reaching out into the hallway, toward me. But there were no arms connected to them. Just hands floating in the darkness, grasping the air with desperate movements. I ran. I dropped my bag. I dropped everything except my flashlight. Hands reached for me as I passed, brushing against my clothes, my hair. I reached the stairs and took them four at a time, not daring to look back. When I arrived at the upper basement, Robert was waiting. He looked at me with an expression that wasn't one of surprise, but of resignation. "You lasted longer than the others," he said simply. It turned out I was the sixth helper he'd hired. The other 5 had fled within minutes, refusing to return even to retrieve their belongings. I told him to keep his $500. I didn't want it. I couldn't accept money tainted with whatever lives in that place. But before I left, I asked him something I needed to know. "What really happened here? What did you do in that sub-basement?" Robert looked at me for a long time before answering. Sensory experimentation. Total isolation. Some patients spent months in those cells, without light, without sound, chained. Many died down there, and no one came for them. No one helped them. The Hillcrest Sanatorium was demolished 3 weeks later. But I spoke to one of the heavy equipment operators months later at a local bar. He told me something I haven't been able to get out of my mind. When they demolished the basements, they discovered a sub-basement larger than the plans showed. There were rooms that hadn't appeared in any official records. And in one of those rooms, chained to the wall, they found clothing. Modern clothing. Jeans, a hoodie, sneakers. My clothes. The ones I was wearing that day. But I got out of the basement. I'm sure I got out, right? Sometimes at night, I hear the sound of chains. And I wonder if I really escaped, or if what I'm writing now is just an echo of something left behind. Narrator's note. The site of the Hillcrest Sanatorium remains vacant. The homes were never built. The developers cited technical difficulties with the site. Local residents say that if you drive by at midnight, you can hear metallic clangs coming from underground.